Thank you for agreeing to hear and watch an interesting story, I think, about a mission my squadron was assigned to and one that I was part of. Greetings. My name is Steve Tucker, and the extent of my service was 5 years. I served in the United States Marine Corps as an aviator during the Vietnam War, and my final rank at discharge was captain. I'm here representing the Freedom Committee of Orange County, California, whose main task is to pass the torch of liberty on to future generations through living history. Our goal is to talk to any schools and students as we can to tell about our personal military stories. Today, I'm your deliverer of living history. I'm also here representing the approximately 58,000 up to 800 men and women by now who gave their lives on behalf of the people of South Vietnam. This does not include the over 300,000 more of our treasured wounded in action, both mentally and physically, with many of them still suffering as victims of that time. First, just a word about the aircraft before we begin the story. The CH-46D Sea Knight. After too many early safety failures, this aircraft served in the Marine Corps for 51 years, was a reliable workhorse in support of the Land, Sea, Air Team in completion of its mission. It was only 3 years old when I started flying. First time I saw one, I thought it was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. As you can see, this aircraft had excellent flight characteristics. It's hovering on the back wheels over a cliff. The Army CH-47 pilots call this a pinnacle maneuver. We call it a ramp hover. It could hover, fly sideways, back up, and skid as smooth as in forward flight. It could spiral down to an LZ and almost vertical attitude to avoid a flat approach and enemy fire. Like the 47, stability was added by having no tail rotor. Counter-rotating blades covered a multitude of sins. There were no slap in the controls, and small control movements made precise corrections. CH-46 went exactly where you wanted it to go. It was easy to fly. Why do you think I could fly it? I got pretty good at it, in fact. Only the skills of the pilot put any limitation on what you could do. Push it, and you might make it. The only problem was that the CH-46 was huge for this particular mission. It was of a much greater size than an Army Huey. Getting into and out of tight spaces could ruin your whole day. There were days I wish I had the Huey. Unfortunately, sometimes this aircraft had to get into tight places. It's pretty much what we had, but it had to be good enough to try and save our boys. Anyway, the rescue of my company is the title of this presentation. Just off the Hai Van Pass is where the rescue took place. From Da Nang to the DMZ, times the South China Sea to Laos, an area of about 75 by 40 miles. It's where I flew all of my missions in Vietnam. This area was in the top half of the I Corps. As you can see on the map there at Phu Bai is where I was stationed through my entire 13-month tour. There was plenty of action in that area that I just mentioned for me. In early May 1968, a Marine company, small company, not 140 plus reinforced one of men, maybe only 80 to 90, near the Hai Van Pass. They became encircled by a superior-sized NBA force, approximately 300 to 400 men, along a steep, rugged jungle-covered mountain hill, 1192 actually. And of course, with everything being in meters in the military, it had to be 3,910 feet high. There were no LZs, even marginal, available for anyone to rescue them near their position. The patrol was to just be a short 2-day reconnaissance mission. The troops were told to leave flak vests and packs behind and bring 2 days' rations and extra ammo. Because of the dense undergrowth and extremely steep incline, it took just a day and a half to reach the summit. The way up might have looked like this. The top was so thin that one could literally straddle the top edge. Their position so steep that the terrain dropped off vertical in places. After almost reaching the peak, and in a minute's time after detection, the lead squad came under intense fire, wounding and killing many of the men. They were pinned down. It was getting dark, and there were no landing zones anywhere near the position. That night, the company engaged in vicious hand-to-hand combat with the enemy and with more wounded. Their extraction seemed hopeless. This is a flak vest. You were told to and would never leave home without it. In the area where these Marines were fighting, there was standing orders to never take it off. Made sense to me. It's made in the form of a vest for two reasons: because the weather was so hot and humid, the men rarely wore a long-sleeved utility shirt under it. Maybe a green T-shirt was all. Probably nothing like this map in the picture. Carrying extra sweat weight was not wise in the bush. While you're out in the bush, the body lost between 8 and 10 pounds a day anyway. Nighttime replenishment was critical. The other reason was that to wound your extremities was very fixable. At least the Navy surgeons said that. I've long wondered who gave the order to leave the vests and packs for the 2-day reconnaissance mission. That turned out to be 8 days. Also, if anyone was disciplined for giving the order. Sometimes during the fog of war, you don't get an answer. After a call for help was made, Operational Wing Command agonized over their fate. Life was landlocked, surrounded, and inaccessible. Their extraction seemed hopeless. Request for helicopter support finally was sent to Marine Air Group Mag 36 at Fubai. That's where I lived. For 6 days beginning on 8 May, the crews of HMM 364 made several attempts to rescue our Marine brothers. This is their story. HMM 364 was given the mission early in the day of 8 May to continuously put aircraft on station throughout the day and into the night. 4 different air crews made numerous attempts to find the location and evacuate the wounded. Bear in mind, the squadron had other missions and other aircraft committed to other Marines in contact. The initial aircraft asked my company to pop smoke for visual contact. Having done so, the chopper crew still could not see the smoke through the thick jungle canopy. With numerous refueling, they kept at it all day. The last effort to get in was late afternoon. It was almost dark. An emergency medevac attempt was made up through the trees. During this emergency medevac, the pilot agreed to lower his hoist and jungle penetrator to an approximate spot called by the radio operator, the RO, who could hear but could not see the chopper overhead. Everything was done based on sound, and the sound, of course, was interpreted by the radio operator. This is the jungle penetrator. I'm sure you've seen these before. Right now, it's got the arms folded down to be sat on. Folded up, coupled with that bullet-looking weighted tip. This will usually fall through trees like a safe. The top is fixed to the chopper's steel cable that is powered to pull casualty, once seated, back up into the aircraft. Well, this time the radio operator guessed right. He found the yellow dangling penetrator. Not too far from his position, secured the wounded man to the hoist. The crew chief hoisted him up into the aircraft. The enemy could hear, if not see, the aircraft, so they shot wildly through the trees. Yankee Kilo 20 was instantly hit multiple times by the North Vietnamese army, causing a fire and the loss of the number 1 engine. As the aircraft began to lose power and altitude, the pilot quickly rolled the bird away from the mountain, kicked the pedals, pushed the nose down to gain airspeed, kept the turns, or the revolutions per minute, up by diving down at the valley below to gain airspeed. This is called the hellhole. The crew was able to hoist the wounded man far enough up into the chopper before turning and diving away without the man hitting the trees. Then he was pulled up through this hole. There's a square hole in the bottom of the fuselage with a removable plate in the exact center of the aircraft to hoist wounded. It's called the hellhole. It also gave access to the hook for hauling external loads beneath the chopper. There was never a center of gravity problem with the aircraft because of its location, midships, and the counter-rotating blade system. I still don't know why it was called the hellhole. I just knew that's what the crews called it. And it was there. Meanwhile, gunners and crew chiefs were throwing everything they could find out the windows and ramp to reduce the weight. They made a safe single-engine roll-on and landing at Da Nang that night. Unfortunately, the medevac died of his wounds. On May 9th, we launched the medevac. 2 aircraft were launched to continue the search for the exact location of my company. After locating approximately where they were, 2 more aircraft were called up to resupply and extract medevacs if possible. The resupply was important as these men were out of everything: food, ammo, medical supplies, medevac, and one of the most precious commodities that they could have, water. The men of my company were never able to see our aircraft through the thick jungle canopy. This is what it might have looked like. All supply drops were done by sound with the help from the radio operator. On the 9th, the second day, the gunners pushed down supplies that went mostly to the Marines. Some, however, ended up in the hands of the enemy. Dropping anything was never good for one side in Vietnam. Again, the NVA could hear the sounds of the choppers and continued to shoot wildly through the trees. Two of the most important items that got to the troops beside medicine, ammo, and water were a chainsaw and C4 explosives and fuses to light it with. The C4 was to be used to knock down the trees, enough trees, to create a path through the jungle and thus a landing zone. Chainsaw ended up being too small, rendering it useless against the larger trees. The C4 did the job. With darkness coming, the wounded men were still stranded, no medevacs. The rest of my company was fighting for their lives again until morning. May 10th, we called Damn the Weather. As if the NBA, North Vietnamese Army, the heat, the humidity, triple jungle canopy, and steep mountain terrain weren't enough, clouds covered the 3,500 to 3,900 foot peaks. Hoping the clouds would break up and expose Mike's position, HMM 364 launched two aircrafts on the 10th. Throughout the day, both aircraft made multiple attempts to find their location. When low on fuel, they would depart to refuel, return, try again. The fuel was just in Da Nang, and it was very close, so they had a lot of time to loiter on station. As night began, clouds still shrouded the mountains, and wounded were forced to suffer yet another night. Hopefully the medical supplies we dropped yesterday would hold them till morning. Always looking for a sucker hole to let down in, or being close enough to a major facility with radar, TACAN, VOR, or any other kind of IFR aid for navigation in Vietnam. This place was too remote. We were pretty close to Da Nang, but not close enough to get a lock on any of the TACANs or that they had, and they did have a VOR as well and some radar. Too bad no GPS back then. Another image of supplies being hauled underneath the aircraft over and overcast in South Vietnam. May 11th was the Hai Van Pass hack check. That's a picture of one of our pilots. One of our senior co-pilots had met all the qualifications to be a helicopter aircraft commander, or a HAC, HAC. All he needed to get the rating was to prove to the NATOPS officer, which was a Naval Air Training and Operating Procedures Standardization check. My pilot was that he was ready to assume his responsibilities for the safety of the aircraft and crew and passengers. All pilots that became aircraft commanders had to go through this check flight. Every squadron had at least one of these senior trained guys on board of their squadron. This day, he would have the chance. And for the life of me, I don't know why the old man, our squadron commander, decided today was the day to do it. I love the Marine Corps, but sometimes the men come in with strange things. I've never understood this check flight needed to be done in such a critical flying mission for a junior pilot. The green machine, just rolls on. There's co-pilot Damage there on the far right of the Oak Club on the night before his trial by fire. Little did he know what awaited. This is the hack check pilot, Major John Chansey. Prior to the hack check, on two of the last 3 days, attempts to find the LZ and medevac, the wounded Arbirds had sustained heavy battle damage and had to abort their missions. Substantial small arms fire kept the metal benders busy. They actually used flattened beer cans to patch the holes when they were out of official aluminum patches. This time, close air support missions were called and conducted before the choppers arrived, and these surely would cut down on the volume of enemy fire, right? We also hooked up with the FAC team in a UNE gunship who marked the approximate location of the NBA with white phosphorus or Willie Pete rockets. By now, the grunts had only one smoke canister left and would pop it when the CH-46 began its approach. As I mentioned, the terrain was ugly. The ground fell away sharply on both sides of the ridge to a valley several hundred feet below. It'd be like falling off Half Dome at Yosemite. The Marine perimeter was about 100 meters, 300 feet below the crest. On cue, the men on the ground, Mike Company, popped their last smoke. Location of Mike was still undetectable from the air because of the dense jungle. Czech pilot began his approach, telling the radio operator to listen for the bird and to provide directions based on the sound. Radio operator's hearing was perfect again. He heard it coming, but couldn't see it until it was directly over him. Pilot settled into a hover above the trees. Now, this is a Czech pilot flying. That precise moment, the ridge line directly in front of the CH-46 came alive. The intense automatic weapons fire. It was close in and deadly accurate. It sliced through the cockpit, cabin area, and engine compartment. One round came up through the plexiglass bubble, hitting Major Chauncey, the Czech pilot, behind the knee, and sliced lengthwise through his thigh. It took out his femoral artery as it exited the thigh. The aircraft began to sink as the number 2 engine fell offline. Not running, kaput. The Major was milking turns, which meant he was going up and down with the collective controls, trying to keep the aircraft level and flying. Still conscious, he made a descending right turn to clear the area, but they were getting closer to the trees. This is a picture of the CH-46 interior cabin. Pilots up front were on the left, behind the wall. That's the gunner right in the center of the picture. Major Chauncey heard the aircraft crew chief say, "Sir, fuel is pouring out of the engine compartment into the cabin." Just before losing consciousness, Chauncey keyed the mic and said to co-pilot Davidge, "You've got it." Davidge was lightly writing the controls anyway. We did this when the other pilot was flying into a lousy situation. You know, a shit sandwich, anything like that. Always when IFR. Davidge had been looking for the smoke to get a visual on Mike Company and didn't see the tracers coming in. He was surprised to hear, "You've got it." His first thought was, this is a strange time for him to want me to fly the aircraft. Then Dean heard the gunfire impacting the outside of the airplane. His initial control movements were so panicked and rough, he tore a pocket out of one of the blades. Quickly, he got smarter, dumped the nose to get some airspeed, and pulled max power to get away. So far, good moves for a hack check. Next, the revolutions per minute, or the turns, began rapidly dropping. He saw the number 2 engine had failed, and number 1 engine temperature was redline, or as we'd say, overtemp, ready to fail. Looked over at the Major covered in blood and thought he probably died. The quick reactions of the crew chief probably saved all of their lives. He happened to run to the cockpit, leaned in and switched off the number 2 fuel boost pump, which stopped the raw fuel from pouring into the cabin from the severed fuel line. Co-pilot Davidge finally gained enough forward speed to fly on the aircraft on 1 engine, as all helo drivers know. This picture that's up now, you can see this nose down pushover attitude is the most vulnerable time for a helicopter to lose an engine or take fire. These are some of the hits that severed the number 2 fuel boost pump line. You can also see the little red tube known as the fuel dump valve. We'll talk about that later. Captain Davidge initially thought of heading to the hospital ship that was closer to Da Nang, closer than Da Nang, and Delta Med to treat the Major, but on second thought, he wisely remembered he would be able to hover over the small platform on the ship on 1 engine. He was able to crash land on the deck safely. He wouldn't be able to take off on 1 engine and thus clog the deck for other medevacs. The ship's crew would have to push the bird overboard. This would not be good for his hack check. He set sail for Da Nang, which was close anyway. Unfortunately, his troubles were not over. As soon as he began his final approach to Da Nang, the Major regained consciousness and began thrashing around in his seat, kicking, pushing, grabbing the controls, basically, as young people would say, out of control, or OOC. Davidge again called the crew chief forward to save the flight once again, and had him restrain the Major while he tried to fly and land the aircraft. Safe roll-on landing was made, and the co-pilot passed his test that day. He became an outstanding hack, and that day saved a helicopter, a crew from drowning, himself from a court-martial. It was a good day all around. May 12th, I titled Crash in the Jungle. The Purple Fox air crews knew what to expect from the NVA shooting at them and have to shoot back on their way out of the zone on every attempt to medevac the wounded. Before attempting another rescue, the Marine A4s were back again on the job to suppress enemy fire. This image shows that the enemy were even chaining themselves high up in trees to have better shots at the choppers. No matter close air support, prep, the crews expected to have to shoot their way in, shoot during the loading, and shoot again on their way out. On this trip, the 250 caliber gunners each carried 1,000 rounds instead of 500. And from the picture here, you can see an M60 machine gun plus 2,000 rounds were attached to the ramp to shoot from the rear. My company had finally blown the trees needed to hopefully get the aircraft to the zone and were supposed to cut down tree stumps with the aforementioned useless chainsaw. Thankfully, they couldn't cut some of the smaller stumps out. That day, 12 May, the plan was that the lead aircraft would fly into the area, look over the situation, find a way in, leave, dump some fuel, as you can see the plane aircraft doing here, until the low lights came on, the low fuel lights came on, this fuel gauge, then return to flying in. Dumping fuel would allow taking more wounded on board. Another thought was, in the event of another shoot down, the aircraft had less of a chance of hurting. The pilot knew they would likely be over max gross weight coming out anyway if they could pick up everyone that they needed to that was injured or wounded. It's always a very close judgment between having enough fuel after dumping, not to flame out and crash mid-mission, or to barely complete the mission. Nobody knew anything about the fuel requirements or the possible consumption for this mission. Through lots of dead reckoning and the radio operator's Mike company, lack of visuals account of the helicopters overhead, pilot finally found a way in. After lots of creeping and slow air taxiing, he found a hole leading into the LZ. He went under the canopy, through a tunnel of trees, a series of turns, and found the Marines. There was no enemy. The pilot needed to maintain a level cabin by wedging the nose gear between the tree stump, as you can see the stumps there, and a fallen log on the steep mountainside, while keeping the rear wheels about 6 feet off the ground. We call that some flying. This image shows how we would turn the tail to 90 degrees, right parallel to the steep side of the mountain. This would allow the crew chief to bring the wounded into the aircraft through the main cabin door. After touching down the nose wheel and getting into a 6-foot stabilized rear wheel hover, within minutes, the crew had all 17 of the most severely wounded on board. By God's grace, still no enemy fire. As the CH-46 backed away from the zone, the ground dropped away, putting the bird out of ground effect. The pilot pulled more pitch on the blades for lift, and that wasn't there. Began losing turns or revolutions per minute. The aircraft continued to flounder back out of the enclosed area, but slowly drifted toward the trees. There was absolutely no room to turn the aircraft around. The pilot now had no control. Their fate was sealed. The aft rotor system blades hit the trees and began to disintegrate. Yankee Kilo 17 fell on its side but didn't slide off the hill, fortunately, because the fuselage was pierced and held in place by some of the trees and stumps my company couldn't trim off with a small chainsaw. Providence. Everyone except the co-pilot were injured and the wounded re-injured. No lives were lost, though. One of the gunners heard loud footfalls coming down the hill toward the aircraft. And fearing it was the NVA, he set up to shoot his 50 caliber at first sight. Fortunately, the grunts of Mike Company had sent a patrol down the mountain to rescue them. Upon stalling the aircraft, the bird had fallen out of sight of Mike Company. When they heard the blades slapping the ground, they thought it had rolled down the mountain and off the cliff. The grunts then and crew helped bring the medevacs back up the hill and inside the Mike Company perimeter. After a full reconnaissance of the area, it was determined the close air support had worked this time and the NVA were no longer a threat, and it left the area. The beat-up crew of Yankee Kilo 17 got some first aid and spent the night with Mike Company. They waited until the next day to catch a medevac back to Fubai. May 13th, I labeled Rescue the Rescuers. The next morning, 13 May, a section of 2 Purple Foxes were dispatched to begin recovery and distribution of the most wounded to many of the medical facilities in the area. My company, by now, had accumulated lots of casualties. Later, a section of 2 more birds, one of which I piloted, were sent to pick up the crew, crashed on the hill, and to continue to evacuate my company's wounded and killed in actions. The last few left less injured or unwounded would be taken out last. The first pilot in on that day's mission said this LD was the most complex mission I've ever attempted. I couldn't see the LZ from the air. My crew chief, who had found the LZ on the previous mission, directed me into the tunnel, then to the LZ. All I did was keep the aircraft in level, slow air taxi, avoiding trees. My crew chief lowered us under the canopy, moving it forward, then left, then right again. He was laying on his back, strapped to the ramp, hanging over the edge. He was calling out right, left, high, low commands until I saw the LZ. He remained there until we left the mountain. We were completely under the canopy of trees. We had to back out, of course. The bird was burning lots of fuel on this trip. Like the pilot before me, I hooked the nose wheel on a tree stump with the rear ramp still several feet off the ground. Then I rotated the tail up to put us parallel to the LZ. One of the gunners came forward and used the front passenger door to load the medevacs. It was difficult to keep the aircraft level, as there was no natural horizon under the trees. Instead, I used the trees as a vertical reference, but the steep sloping ground provided no clue to the horizontal attitude of the aircraft. When we were loaded, I began backing out under the direction of the crew chief. When I personally entered the approach to the LZ, I had to agree with the previous pilot's assessment. The LZ was like flying into and backing out of a covered enclosure, and one of the flight crews called it the garage. We were the last aircraft out of the LZ. It was almost dark when my bird picked up the last few unwounded, slightly wounded, and the KIAs, killed in actions. Mission accomplished. That day, the total of 42 medevacs, numerous killed in actions, and the remaining men of the company were lifted off the mountain. At the end of the ordeal, we'd lost operational use of 4 aircraft to excessive battle damage, plus the one that had crashed with only parts recoverable. 7 crew members were wounded in action. By the way, that's me on the left, and 2 other pilots who flew on that resupply and final mission that day. The end.